Welcome to another episode of Gender in Focus. I'm Elle. I'm here with Kai. How's it going?
Hello, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing so well. I'm in actually quite a funny mood today. Like I feel silly. So that's
it might come
good.
through.
Yeah, sorry for whatever is about to happen.
Sorry that you're going to have fun.
Yeah, sorry. And even if you're not, I'm dragging you with me. For some reason, conversations about trans people so often have a habit of turning into the direction of surgery. Today, we're going to be talking about why surgery becomes such a focus in conversations about trans people and what this curiosity can look like, especially at work, which can get a little bit dicey. So to start us off, Kai, could you go into what we're actually talking about when we're talking about balancing kind of privacy and openness around surgeries at work?
Yeah, this is a good one to anchor in because we might be looking at one thing, but it actually will unpack a lot of different things. But it's helpful to anchor in one thing because this one's a big one and it comes up so much. Yes, I can't tell you. I mean, I don't get it anymore now that I work at that I'm with Transfocus, dealing with these issues directly. But certainly, when I first came out, I got a lot of questions, even within a workplace context, about my body. Like if we're talking about surgeries, we are talking about bodies, and it's not just bodies, it's the more private aspects of body, right?
Yeah.
And the common refrain, just to make it really concrete for folks who either haven't experienced it themselves or haven't heard of it, is the common question is, drum roll, have you had the surgery? And I paused briefly on the because we'll unpack that a little bit later on, but there's something to be said about that part. But yeah, it's the common thing. People want to know what's happening and, what trans people are doing and who are they, and they're very inquisitive. But the surgery one is kind of top of the list among many others. So yeah.
Why is that? Why do conversations about trans and non-binary people always seem to go in that direction, or very often end up focusing on surgery in the first place?
Yeah, I was a bit taken aback, especially in the workplace. I thought,
I can imagine,
people would have pause, right? But I think what happens, and of course we would need to ask cis people directly, what's kind of happening behind the scenes. Yeah, exactly. Maybe we'll get somebody on who can kind of unpack that. I think what happens, or what I kind of observed from the outside whenever somebody asks me that question, is they're very excited to talk about a trans person, a real live in the flesh, holy crap, here he is, right? Like, and so I think it's coming from a good place of like enthusiasm and like, finally, I have all of these built up questions that I finally get to place somewhere, right? And potentially even get answered. And so I think that enthusiasm kind of takes them away from thinking about the person and what they're feeling and experiencing with this inquiry process. A second part to it is that people are very focused on trans bodies because for many cis people, their gender is deeply interwoven with their bodies. In fact, for many, gender equals body, right? End of story, right? And so a natural starting point for them is the body of a trans person. Like, you should, or why haven't you, or kind of almost a bit of an anxiety around, okay, I know you're trans, but like, we got to make it fit, right? And so let's inquire to see what's happening here. And I don't think people intend for that, but that's certainly how it comes across on the receiving end of that type of question.
For sure. I want to just sort of reverse a second, because
Yeah.
you brought up at the beginning, sort of, you mentioned about the surgery and the emphasis on the. And I would love for you to go into the assumptions that are sort of hiding beneath that, the surgery.
Yeah, there's so much packed into that question. I don't think people who are asking it may not entirely realize. And it's not like they're a bad person for asking, or
Yeah.
there's something wrong, right? We're simply wanting to show and highlight what is actually baked into that question. So I don't want to kind of blame or shame people, but there is a lot there that on the surface is not apparent at first glance. So what are the things? Um, the first thing that it says is that, the assumption that people kind of ought to have surgery,
Yeah.
and not everybody undergoes gender affirming care, including surgeries. In fact, I would say the majority don't, and that does surprise people,
Yeah.
because the assumption being that trans people want to be more like cis people and be aligned, right? That's not always the case. So it's important not to presume that somebody is wanting to have surgery or is going to, or maybe they want it but they can't access it, right? And that's painful to know that and not be able, through cost or some other reason, not be able to access. The part that I paused with the is because it's singular, the surgery, one surgery. And maybe some trans people would love that to be one surgery, but it is in fact many different surgeries, upper and lower, stuff related to the vocal cords, related to the face, on and on, really. There's
Yeah.
so many different options. And of course, not everybody avails themselves, if they want surgery, to everything. So everybody is kind of picking and choosing the ones that are right for them. And also, it kind of gets to this, that we kind of think of, when we think of trans people, is often, really related to their body, as I was saying at the beginning, but not just to their body, but kind of, if I could go a layer deeper, it's actually to their genitals, right? And that being kind of the epicenter, I'm putting in heavy air quotes, of one's identity, from the perspective of cis people. And that is not how most trans people, certainly we may have feelings and thoughts and experiences of that part of our body, but that's not the center of our identity. There's so much more to us. I would say for everyone, but
For sure. Yeah. See, when you put it like that, it sounds ridiculous.
yeah,
The idea that your very identity is tied to whatever genitals someone has. And yet
yeah,
that is so often how it's perceived. And when you lay it out like that, I would imagine most people would go, oh, right.
right.
Of course not. But that
Yeah,
is the focus for so many
yeah,
people. That's like it laser focuses on that as soon as somebody comes
yeah,
out as trans.
yeah. Want to really get into all of that, and really, it's coming from a place of wanting to understand, but
Yeah.
it's like how that understanding is kind of brought about, that is, feels off to many trans and non-binary folks. Yeah, because usually when people are coming out, they're very excited about so many different things, being able to be themselves, being properly addressed, and certainly changing bodies for some is at play, and that is
Yeah.
exciting, right? It's not to downplay that, because that is important. But if that's the only thing, it's like, hey, wait a second, there's so much more, right? Yeah.
I think that's so becomes so apparent when speaking to trans people about what brings them that gender euphoria or that gender joy is, of course, for some or for many, bodies are a part of that. But when I've had conversations, at least, it's always been, or predominantly been, this kind of smaller things, like getting someone getting their first haircut where they cut their hair short was like a huge thing. And bodies are of course part of it, but like it's not the thing. It's not the main part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's why having this kind of question be the only thing misses all of the richness.
Yeah. People are generally asking that for a lot of reasons, and you've talked about how it's just trying to make sense of things, and often, like you said at the beginning, where it's like exciting because you suddenly got this trans person in front of you, and maybe you've never knowingly met a trans person before, so now you've got this live person to answer all my questions. And so a lot of it is just curiosity, right? People are so curious about this, and bodies comes into that for the reasons that you've listed. But I wanted to ask about the difference between asking a question because you're wanting to support someone and asking a question because you're super curious and why that feels different to be on the receiving end of that too.
Yeah, that's such an important thing, because we may not be aware of why we're asking, and that can then kind of impact how that person receives the question.
Yeah.
But if you're able to ask a question that is oriented towards support rather than fulfilling one's curiosity, that's a totally different ballgame, right? One where, especially if you're trying to determine if some sort of support is needed, that is oriented on the trans and non-binary person and where they're at and their humanity and their dignity, right? Versus fulfilling one's own or centering one's own curiosity is actually more about, it can convey, even if you don't feel this way, that, you know, oh, this oddity or this kind of outlier thing, and
Right.
I want to go kind of look at it and then figure
Yeah.
it out, right? And that just feels totally different. And I'm sure people who are cisgender on this call might be able to relate in a different way. When somebody comes from abroad, they can have a similar vibe of like, you're weird, I got to figure you out, and I'm going to pummel you with questions to serve my needs, right? Versus like, what does this person need? What is their experience? How can I be, you know, of service to them? You know, it's a very different orientation. One that can make a huge difference if focused on the other person. And you're also kind of baked into that is there's a bit of a reflection of like, do I need to know this?
Right.
Will this help this person? Or is it just primarily for me?
You know what I was thinking about like a little while ago was, this came up for a friend of mine who's not trans, who's cis, who's pregnant. And when they told people that they were pregnant, the question people asked quite a lot was, were you trying, or was it an accident? And when you really think about that question, it's so weird, but it came up all the time. And I think people they're curious, or they're wanting to connect, or they're trying to figure something out, but don't realize how weird the questions are. And I think that's like such an odd thing. And trans people are kind of experiencing this on a whole other level, where you're like, I get that it's something to be interested in, or something that's curious, but it's weird. It's a really weird question to ask, no? Especially at
Well,
work.
oh yeah, for sure, at work. And I think sometimes people, because they're talking euphemistically, so they're kind of in a kind of, have you had the surgery, doesn't feel as weird as have you changed your genitals, you know, which is kind of what you're asking about, right? So,
Right.
and similar with the pregnancy, it's like, you know, was it an accident is not, or were you trying is not saying, have you had lots of sex in the last little bit, you know, like
Right.
people, because they can kind of code it a bit, it buffers it. But this is kind of at the core, especially on the receiving end,
Yeah.
of the awkwardness of like, I don't want to have to talk to you about this for some, you know.
Right. Yeah. And that's such a good reframe to figure out like whether a question is appropriate or not, is to be like, okay, get specific. What is it that you're
Yeah.
actually asking?
Yeah. Really unpack it to like its base layer, and then do you still feel comfortable asking it?
Right.
Okay, might give us some clues.
I kind of want to switch into looking at it specifically about work, because those questions get asked outside of work as well, but
Yeah.
within work it's such a different vibe, like it's such a different context, and it feels very different when it's at work. And so when someone is considering sharing information about potentially having surgery in their workplace, what factors might influence how much a trans person wants to disclose, because it is such a different context?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much at play in terms of, you know, where they're situated, how long they've been at the organization, how relevant it is to the workplace. I mean, you know, if it's about something in the past, maybe not as relevant versus something that's about to happen, and maybe people need time off. That's a practical consideration, right? And yet, you know, as the employer or human resources or even the manager of this trans individual who's about to do surgery, you're not getting into the detail of this surgery, right? Necessarily. It's really about the time off. That's really the key thing, right? You know, do you need 3 weeks off? Do you need a month? Do you need, you know, 2 months, right? What are the kind of nitty gritty of that? And so those are some of the things at play for a trans individual and whether or not they're wanting or needing to share about surgeries at work.
Some people are more open than others. Some people are super open and happy to discuss, and others are extremely private and not wanting, understandably, not wanting to discuss it with their colleagues. So how can organizations avoid treating trans and non-binary employees as a sort of monolith, or in the same way, taking into account the different ways that people are feeling about sharing?
Yeah. That's where it's really important to be attuned to and aligned with the trans person. So not kind of assuming one way or another. One way, they don't want to talk about it at all versus they want to talk about it every minute. You know, like you need to really see the person in front of you to check in, to be like, okay, you know, you're taking kind of next steps in your journey. We want to be as supportive as possible. Are there things that you're comfortable talking about, and are there things that you're not comfortable talking about? And then, like giving that trans and non-binary person the stage to clarify in their own words what they're okay with. And you know, some people are very, as you mentioned, very private about surgeries and certainly don't want to talk about it in the workplace. And then for others, it's like not a big deal, or perhaps they're pretty excited about it. And, you know, for those who are okay with talking about it, they might want to, right? And not to be kind of stifled in that. Obviously, it needs to be both ways, right? For because surgeries, you know, maybe not everybody's comfortable talking about those with folks, even if trans people do. But for those who are comfortable, it's okay to go into that conversation. Right? And so, yeah, I think it's just understanding where somebody falls along that range of different approaches to talking about surgeries or other aspects of coming out or being trans. Yeah.
If someone is finding themselves very curious about if someone is there's a trans person at work and they're finding themselves pretty curious about surgery or their transition in general, what are some questions that they can ask themselves before saying anything? That feels like a really patronizing question, but sometimes I think a lot of this is not even thought about at all. Like the question will just come out of their mouth. So, and I've definitely, as an ADHDer, impulsivity is a problem. And so information can be shared en masse without thinking, and questions can be asked en masse without thinking. So I get it.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes when people are curious.
Oh, for sure. And I think to some degree, it's really important, especially if it's new to people, to slow down. So I think that's step number one, is just to like breathe, you know, and we're going to go through this slowly so that we don't jump and, to varying degrees of success, I'm sure. And that's okay. But I think the other thing that folks can do is to reflect on, ask yourself, to yourself, not with others in the, just, why do I need to know this, or do I want to know this? And you might be surprised by the answer. It's like, I don't know enough about this and I want to be sure I understand, or, whatever the reasons may be. And another thing to do too is kind of, we have this concept of turning around statements towards oneself, right? So just flipping that question to ask yourself, to ask yourself the question of like, not have you had the surgery? Because likely if you're cis, you're not having surgeries, although some do, right? And it's just to say, ask yourself a question about your own genitals and think about it coming from somebody else, like, would you feel comfortable with that? Probably not, especially at work.
Right.
So that could give you a hint, like, I don't feel comfortable, so probably somebody else might not, right? It's not to paint everybody with the same brush, but at least we're being a bit more cautious, right? And the last thing that I would suggest is also, if you're really wanting to know, there are so many other places to go. That's the thing. Now we have, especially on YouTube, there are so many trans and non-binary folks sharing their story, talking in depth about surgery, right? Like giving you like footage from within the surgical room, right? Like detailed. You don't actually need to have all the questions answered by the person in front of you. You can go to YouTube and Google that and probably get a good cross-section too of not just white, able-bodied, trans masculine folks, right? Like you can get, people with, who are Black, who are people with disability. Like you can get a bit more of a range that can really highlight some of the things in common and that are distinct too. So that's where I would say you're better kind of bang for your buck to go to YouTube. Yeah.
I want to also talk about the dynamic at work when someone has been away, they've had surgery, they've gone away. For some people, it can be like 2 months. It can be short, but it can be, depending on the surgery, it can be a really long time that someone's away. And so what does it look like to acknowledge that someone has been away, like when they come back, to acknowledge that someone has been away without immediately turning into an interrogation about their surgeries?
Yeah, this is really important because something has happened, right? And it's not like, because one other extreme is just to pretend like nothing has happened, right?
Right. Yeah.
And people, for some, that might be comfortable, right? If we think about kind of the style of reception, some people just want to business as usual. They want to talk about it, think about it, whatever. And if we've checked in with them, we know that. And versus some sort of acknowledgement, but not in a way that pinpoints it. So, to say, hey, you've been away for 6 weeks. How are you feeling? And we talk about that in a general way, not specific to the surgery. Not how are you feeling after having gotten top surgery, or whatever. If you know that. I mean, sometimes people don't know that, but or rather than asking, what kind of surgery did you have? Does it work? Are you regretting it? Like people can be peppered with these type of things.
Does it work?
I mean, so yeah, the kind of checking in to see how they're doing, as you would with other people who are recovering, right? Your care and concern is in their state, not the specifics of what they did, right? And I think that's a beautiful way to acknowledge it, and then that gives you indication of how much or little they want to talk about it, right? Because if they're kind of quick answer and then on to their task, that tells you something, versus, maybe they go into a little bit of detail, in which case there's a bit of an open door there. Not for going all in with all the questions, but just more another thoughtful question, and see where it goes from there. Yeah.
That's the thing. I think a lot of people maybe forget that if somebody does want to share, they will. Like if they're feeling comfortable, you don't actually need to drag it out of someone, because if you're having to do that, then there's probably not a willingness to discuss it. So with that, I really want to touch on what you just said about, in some cases, there is maybe a lack of acknowledgement, and that kind of let's completely avoid talking about it at all. And what happens there when workplaces swing too far in either direction. When they're either making a huge spectacle of someone's return or someone's transition in the first place coming out, or whatever it is, versus acting as though nothing has happened at all.
Right. Yeah, I'll start on the pretending nothing's happened. That has its own harm, and I think people may not realize it because they think, oh, well, it's a private matter and it's not relevant to the workplace, and so we shouldn't even like glance in its direction, you know.
Right.
And that is harmful because people are undergoing something big. If there is some sort of surgery involved, and it has a net positive impact, but it's still a big thing, right? And for there to be nothing, it's like, I've just done this thing, big thing, and it's very strange. It's a very strange type of silence that in some cases can feel uncomfortable or even sad or even isolating, because some of the messaging that can be baked in there is, oh, this is too odd for us to go there, right?
Yeah.
And this is your own thing, you do you, but like, we're not gonna deal with it, right? And so that can be kind of very disconcerting, versus the kind of the really wanting to acknowledge and even celebrate and really go into it. That might work if that person is comfortable with that style of reception, right? Maybe they want a cake, I don't know. But if you've mismatched with somebody who wants to remain more private or quiet about it, that can be jarring. Because you're like, holy smokes, I just want to go about my work, and suddenly there's something very personal, very private out in the open, and I just want to crawl under a rock, So it's so important. It's not just about what actions are taken, but it's like figuring out or knowing the personality of the person in front of you. And we know this about birthdays, right? Or maybe we should, I don't know. But like, I know among my friends who doesn't like to have, like, if I were to do a surprise birthday party for one of my friends, they would break up with me. Like, they'd be like, that's it. Like, you don't know me. So in the similar vein, and then there's others who, like, if I don't, it's like also a problem, So just thinking about that analogy hopefully helps with matching in ways that are more helpful to the individual.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good example of the birthday party. If somebody made a surprise party for me, I'd cry. I think I'd cry and run away.
Right? So would I be like, what is going on here?
I don't want this.
I had a person in my life many years ago who was like, I'm gonna arrange a surprise birthday party for you. Is that okay? They knew enough to check in, and then I was like, please don't. Right. And then like, okay, never mind. Yeah. But they had to like unsurprise it.
Right. Yeah, that's good that they got a vibe of being like, something's not quite right here. I better check in. Ruin the surprise in the process. That's funny. I would like to just go back to thinking about your own curiosity versus centering what that other person might need, because you explained that really well, and I can't remember what you said, but it was the way that who it is you're centering in the questions that are being asked, and I would really like it if you could go into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of focused on the trans or non-binary person, or focused on yourself and what you need based on your curiosity. And that distinction is something that came up in, like, I have a little bit of a story from something I was attending at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. There was a keynote speaker there, JQ, who had this beautiful story that was really impactful for him. He has a glass eye, and he was meeting up with somebody to visit with him. And that person asked a very poignant question that he's never been asked before. And he's like, which side of you should I sit so you can see me, right? Because he's not seeing out of his glass eye, right? And so just that consideration. So it is asking about, Jay's glass eye, but it's oriented in a way that impacts or improves his ability to be with that person. And he had enough foresight to think to ask that question, or maybe spontaneously in the moment, who knows? But that's not coming from that. I mean, there might be some curiosity for that person, but it is to support that person. You know what I mean? So it is a very differently oriented question, that's not just fully self-serving. It's really with that person in mind. And similar things can also be done with trans and non-binary folks, where if you're asking as a way to better support them, that's a very powerful question versus you just really want to know about X, Y, and Z, which is generally readily available on the internet nowadays.
Right. I love that example because it's so it's such a perfect way to describe, like, we're not gonna, because sometimes people can be like, oh, I don't really want to acknowledge, but like you can acknowledge that there's something to consider, but it can be from the position of it's not just me satisfying a curiosity. I think that's so powerful. With that, then, just to end this episode, what would you want? I don't know, if listeners are remembering just one thing from the conversation today, what would you want them to keep in mind when navigating privacy and openness and all of that around surgeries, specifically at work?
Yeah. It's to slow down and pause and just figure out a way to ask questions that isn't only about satisfying our own curiosity. There are places to meet. So curiosity isn't a bad thing. I think sometimes we think, oh, that's bad of me to think or say that. It's not so much that it's a bad thing. It will likely come up. And but then it's just like where to place that makes it. Are you going to orient it to the person so they're responsible for it, or are you going to take responsibility for it and direct it in different ways to satisfy it? And in that way, you don't have to ask every single thing that comes to mind. And especially for trans people who are already navigating quite a bit of inquiry, I think that's probably missing in many people's understanding, is that it's not just that one person who asked it. It's times 100, times 1,000, it's just a lot. And so I think taking responsibility for one's own curiosity is an important aspect, but certainly not completely shying away and pretending like nothing, but it's just thoughtful in the moment, aligned with the trans or non-binary person can help you find a better way forward.
Thank you so much, Kai.
Thank you.
That will be helpful, because I'm sure that comes up a lot for trans people.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Well, thank you too.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll see you next week.
Bye for now.
Cheerio.